Hi everyone, my name is Calliope. I was born and raised in Carmel by the Sea, a small coastal town in California. My family was not well off, just making ends meet, so I didn't have the opportunity to go to college. Like many of my friends, after graduating from high school, I started working at a supermarket as a sales clerk to help support my family. Life was a bit rough, but I didn't have many options. I knew it was my responsibility to contribute to the family income. In early 2020, when I was 25, I met and married my husband. He was 3 years older than me and worked as an auto mechanic at a small garage in town. He was a calm, quiet man who seemed trustworthy, which made me believe that I could build a stable life with him. My husband is Chinese American. My mother-in-law is American, but my father-in-law is my husband's family is unique, with two different cultures mixed together. My mother-in-law, a typical American woman, is quite open and friendly, always trying to preserve traditional American family values. She has a modern lifestyle and often participates in community activities, including yoga sessions and other social events. She is gentle and polite and always shows concern for me, at least on the surface. My father-in-law, on the other hand, carries the traditions and conservative thinking of an older generation Chinese man. He is about 52 years old, a man who appears calm on the outside, but is unpredictable on the inside. He worked in construction when he first came to the United States, and later became a small manager in a machine shop. Although he is retired, he still acts as the spiritual leader of the family. After we got married, although our life was not rich or luxurious, I used to feel happy. We lived a simple life working together and sharing the small joys of daily life. I believed that as long as we were together, everything would be fine. But what I did not expect was that the mental and physical deficiencies gradually eroded our initial happiness. To be honest, my husband, although he looks big and strong, is very weak in sex. This has become a big problem, but I don't know how to deal with it. He often has premature ejaculation, and every time it happens, I can't hide the disappointment that rises in my heart. I tried not to let it affect our relationship, but the repetition made our life gradually become more boring and empty, especially when, after more than a year of living together, we still don't have children. This puts more and more pressure on my shoulders. My husband is the eldest son, and he is the only son in his family. Besides him, the family also has a younger sister, but she is still in college, and her future of getting married and having children is still far away. So all the expectations and responsibilities of having children to continue the family line fall on us, and that became a burden I couldn't escape. I felt a lot of pressure, not only from my husband's family, but also from myself. I knew my husband felt the pressure too, but he never said anything. He just tried to avoid it by staying silent, by working harder. As for me, every day, I had to face the silent questions from my mother-in-law, the scrutinizing eyes of my father-in-law. I knew that my husband's family was expecting, even demanding more from me, but I didn't know how to solve the problem. When my husband refused to face it, we gradually became distant, and the marriage began to crack from those small details, things that we never said out loud, but changed everything one evening. My husband's parents called us together, sitting solemnly, as if preparing for an important conversation. I could feel the tension in the air before they spoke. When my mother-in-law gently suggested that we go to the doctor to check if there was anything wrong, I was not surprised, in fact. I had been waiting for this conversation for a long time. I understood that our childlessness had become a big concern for them, and no matter how gentle she was, I still felt the pressure hanging over my head, like a weight. I sat there silent, looking at my hands, as my mother-in-law continued to explain that she just wanted to make sure everything was okay, that no one had any serious problems. I understood what she meant. She didn't say it directly, but I knew she was implicitly questioning my fertility. At that moment, I felt a strange sense of shame, as if it were all my fault. But my husband had a different reaction. He sat up straight, his face tense. He refused, immediately saying that we didn't need to do any tests. His tone was a little hard, and I knew he was protecting his ego. He didn't want to admit that he might have a problem. Every time I brought it up, he would avoid it or brush it off. as if it wasn't worth worrying about. But the truth was, it had become a huge shadow in our lives. The in-laws looked at him, and the atmosphere in the room gradually became more stifling. No one said anything more, but the silence was heavy, full of unexpressed disappointment. I felt like I was stuck between two worlds. On one side was the responsibility of a wife, to give birth to a child to preserve the family line. On the other side was my husband, who was refusing to face reality, leaving me at a loss for what to do. As time passed, the atmosphere in the house became heavier and heavier. Every meal became tense every time I saw my in-laws. I felt invisible pressure pressing down on me. Their questions about my health, their words of encouragement were no longer concern, but knives cutting deep into the fear inside me. Not having children had become a hidden wound. Each passing day made it one evening in September 2021. A day that I still remember vividly, because what happened next completely changed my life. My husband had a party at work, so he came home late. My mother-in-law had a yoga class with her friends, as usual, so it was just me and my father-in-law at home. I never thought that he could be a danger to me. At that time, I just considered him a family member, even though my relationship with him was never very close. After a long day of work, I took a shower and changed into a short dress, simply because I wanted to be comfortable at home. I went to the kitchen and prepared dinner for both of us. I didn't think much of it. It was just a normal meal between two family members. I remember clearly when I walked into the living room. My father-in-law was sitting on the chair, his eyes looking at me a little strangely, but I didn't pay much attention at that time. I called him in for dinner as usual. He stood up and slowly walked into the kitchen. Everything seemed normal at first, but there was an uneasy feeling that I couldn't explain. After the meal, I was standing washing the dishes. The kitchen was quiet, except for the sound of running water, and I was focused on my work, not realizing that something was about to happen. Suddenly, I felt a pair of arms wrap around my waist and hugged me tightly from behind. I was startled, turned around in panic, and saw that the man was none other than my father-in-law. At that moment, I didn't know how to react. My mind was in turmoil, unable to believe that this was actually happening. I wanted to scream to push him away, but my mouth was covered by him. I couldn't escape, and all my pleas seemed to go unspoken. He held me tight, and while I was still in shock, he whispered in my ear that he would help me get pregnant. At that moment, a shiver ran down my spine. His words made me feel disgusted, but I was helpless, unable to do anything. Before I could react, he acted. Everything happened quickly, violently, and I had no time to resist. The feeling at that moment was terrifying. A numbness covered my whole body, and I could only stand there, letting everything happen, without being able to do anything. When it was over, I collapsed, holding my head and sobbing, the feelings of shame, disgust, and fear mixed together, almost suffocating me. But my father-in-law, with a cold and calm expression, only said that he did this for the happiness of the family. He stood up, walked away as if nothing had happened, leaving me in chaos and despair. That night, I didn't dare tell my husband. I didn't know how to face this. I was afraid that if I spoke out, things would go too far, and our marriage would be beyond saving. I chose to remain silent, trying to suppress the pain and fear inside me, pretending that nothing had happened. After the first time, things were no longer the same. I tried to live my normal life, keeping things going as if nothing was unusual. But every time I faced my father-in-law, I couldn't dispel the feeling of shivering in fear. The way he looked at me had changed. It was no longer the indifferent, calm look like before. Every time I met that look, I could feel something different. A possessiveness, a desire that I had never seen before. That look confused me, panicked me, but also drew me into a spiral of guilt and torment that I couldn't escape. Another evening, not long after that first time, my husband worked overtime at work, and my mother-in-law went to yoga. As usual, I stayed home feeling uneasy. The fear of facing my father-in-law always haunted me. Whenever we were alone at home, that evening when he walked into the house, I knew the worst was about to happen again. There was no more avoiding eyes or restraint. Like before this time, he walked straight towards me. And before I could realize what was happening, he pulled me into the room. Everything happened so fast. I had no time to react or resist. The door closed behind us. In the small space, I could feel his heavy breathing right next to my ear. This time he was much more forceful. My feeble resistance only made him more determined. I tried to push him away, but that only brought him closer, forcing me to accept the fact that I could not escape this situation. What surprised me even in that moment of terror was his mastery. My father-in-law, even at 52, had a strength and ability in bed that I had never seen in my husband. My husband, despite his tall appearance, was always weak and hasty in intimacy, which gradually made me feel disappointed and distant. But my father-in-law, on the contrary, knew exactly what he had to do. Every action, every gesture was full of control and power. I didn't want to admit it, but deep down, I felt something I had never felt with my husband. Pleasure mixed with guilt, fear combined with shame. I didn't know what to do. I just knew that I had been drawn into something that I couldn't free myself from. After it was all over, I sat down, my heart heavy, but he acted as if nothing had happened, as if it were a given, a part of life that I had to accept. After that, my father-in-law and I became even more secretive. Whenever my husband was away from home, or my mother-in-law was busy, it became an opportunity for him to approach me. Every time I saw him, I could feel the tension in the air, but there was also something that pulled me towards him, despite all my reason and resistance. It was a complex feeling, a mixture of hatred and repressed desire, that I could not resist, could not break away from this sinful relationship. We both knew that what we were doing was wrong, but neither of us seemed to be able to stop. I found myself sinking deeper into this relationship, trapped between guilt and emotions that I could not control. About a year later, I gave birth to a baby boy, the child that my husband's family had long awaited, as a release from the pressure that had lasted. All this time, for everyone it was happiness, a sign that the family was complete. But for me it was an obsession, the result of a terrible secret that I had to bear. Alone, I looked at my son, both loving and painful, wondering if he knew anything about the circumstances of his birth. The moments I held him in my arms, I clearly felt the heaviness in my heart. After the birth of our child, my husband and I moved out. Having a child gave my husband some joy and peace of mind, but I knew that there was an invisible wall between us. The closeness we once had was completely gone. Every time I looked into my husband's eyes, I felt like I was hiding something unforgivable. My conscience was always tormenting me, a feeling of guilt that clung to me every day. I couldn't tell him the truth. I knew that if I confessed, everything would fall apart. Our life, our family, our children, everything would collapse. I didn't have the courage to face that consequence. Instead, I chose to keep everything to myself, to keep the pain inside, and to live in a stifling silence. Every day I had to pretend that everything was fine, that I didn't have a terrible secret. But deep down, I always felt the rift between us. Even though he doesn't know it, I still feel guilty towards my husband. I feel like I've betrayed him, not only physically but also mentally. But I don't know how to get out of this spiral, when the truth is too painful to say, and the silence is swallowing me up. Day by day, I stand here carrying the pain in my heart, and I don't know what to do next. My son, my husband, my family, everything seems so fragile, as if just one confession from me would shatter everything. But I can't bear this guilt forever. I wonder, should I confess to my husband? Should I tell him the truth about what happened, about the secret relationship with my father-in-law, about the real reason why I feel guilty every day? But if I tell him, will he forgive me? Our lives would probably never be the same, and I would probably lose everything. Or should I keep quiet, bury this secret forever? I can live with this torment, if it means protecting my family, protecting my child from destruction. But this silence is eating me up, making me unable to escape the pain and shame. I really don't know what to do. What would you do if you were in my situation? Should I confess to free myself, or keep quiet to protect my family? I need help, need advice from people who understand this feeling.